Hi chess friends, this is the FIDE Master Alessandro Santagati, and this is the first video about my new video series about the opening. In this case, we'll focus attention about the Scandinavian Defense. I'll play against it. So the Scandinavian Defense is the opening after e4, d5. The idea about d5 is make pressure against e4, and usually white will take, and after that black can choose to take with the queen or play Nf6. I will do 10 videos about this opening, and I will follow the attention about queen takes d5 and also about knight f6. Okay, in the first videos I will follow the attention about knight f6. The idea about this move is take the pawn with the knight to don't bring immediately the queen in the game, and we must understand what to do after this move. The first idea could be play c4. The idea about c4 is defend upon d5. But if you play this, at the same time you weaken the square d3 and d4, because now no pawns can defend the squares. And for this reason, after that, black can try to sacrifice a pawn with c6. And now black ideas make pressure on the center and take space on the center. So after d takes c6 and knight c6, for sure black could play e5, then bishop c5, and black had a very strong compensation for the pawn in this case. So my tip is don't play this way, so don't play c4. I don't like it. And my tip is play simply d4. So you take space on the center. Black will take with the knight, no problem. When you want, you can play c4 and you can take more space. You have a good and easy development with this opening in this case. So it's not so important to defend the pawn, it's not important to have a pawn up now. So d4 is much better. After d4, I think black has two options. A very aggressive option is bishop g4. And now after bishop g4 is very common for white play f3. F3 is good because in this way you can try to defend the pawn d5. For example, after bishop f5 you can simply play bishop check. If c6 you can just take the pawn, and if knight d7 you can also play or c4 or knight c3. And the white idea would be try to defend the pawn, try to stay with the pawn up. But in this position the problem is that it's a very sharp position and you can have a lot of problems if you don't know very well the opening. So my tip is don't go in this variation and play in a different way. But you know, this opening, this variation is playable, but it's dangerous. So my tip is don't play this way, but play knight f3. Knight f3 is fine, it's good, and at the same time I think you can have an easy game. For this reason, I give you this tip. Okay, so knight f3, now what black can do? Okay, if queen takes d5, I think you can also play simply bishop e2. And if black try to castle queenside with knight c6, for example, you can simply castle queenside, bishop e3. I think now e5 doesn't work, because if black will do e5, you can simply play c4, and after, for example, queen a5, you can play d5, and white can take a good position, no attacks against the white king, and now black has problem about the center because d5 is attacking the knight. Black has to find a square for this knight, so I think this position is fine for. I think it's fine for white. Yeah. So e5 immediately doesn't work. If, for example, queen h5, that can be another option that black can do. It's simply playable knight b d2. In this kind of position, I prefer bring the knight on d2 and not on c3, because also, for example, after something like, you can imagine a6, c4, queen h5. In this kind of position, knight b d2 is much better, because if you play knight c3, black can try to do, for example, e5, and after d5, you have the problem that this pawn is pinned. But if you play knight d2, this knight can be useful is to defend the knight on f3, and at the same time to avoid e5, because after e5 you can just push d5, and the pawn on d5 is not pinned. So my tip is this, playing this way. So for example, knight c6, simply castle, And for example, after castle queenside is also playable. C5, C4 immediately is not bad. Queen can go to H5. Now bishop E3, and now probably in this case it's not good, this variation, because you give the chance to play E5 immediately, and again we have the same problem. So I don't like this line. Now it's much better to play immediately bishop E3 to defend the pawn, and then play knight E2, C4, and something like that. If queen H5 immediately, also H3 is playable, can be another option, because if bishop takes H3, you can simply go knight E5, and now the queen is under attack. And if queen H4, you can simply trade on C6, B takes, and you take the bishop. And yeah, I think you can simply defend your king, so it's not a big problem. This for white is also playable bishop F3, bishop G2 to defend, so I think not a big problem for white. Defend this position. White is up a piece, so white can be happy about this position. For this reason, yeah, this is an idea. If queen D5 is not a big problem. So bishop E2, then you can also play castle kingside without big problems. If now black moves knight takes D5, now H3 is fine. Force black to take a choice about that, or bishop H5, or maybe take. Yes, it's also playable bishop F5, for example, but in this case, I think I can simply play bishop D3, ready to trade, I think. And now my queen on D3 is very dangerous, because can go here, and maybe C6 to also defend the square B5, castle, and then I can have an easy plan to have a good position. C4, knight to C3, rook D1, and when I want, I can make pressure with D5, for example. I can try to play for my majority on the queen side, so this is fine. Usually after H3, black or play bishop H5, and in this case I can play simply C4, and after knight B6 I play C5, and now C5 is interesting because there is a hole maybe on D5, but it's not a big problem, because if knight E5, then queen B3, and white is much better, because the knight is under attack, the pawn is under attack. Yes, the knight is a defender, but the big problem is I'll defend B7. It's not very easy, maybe B6 to do that, but now I can play also G4, bishop G6, knight D5, and now this knight is threatening also bishop B5, so maybe C6 to avoid that. And after knight C3, knight takes, pawn takes. The big problem is that when you take C5, I can play queen B7. My simple threat can be also bishop C4. I can have a very good attack against the pawn F7. So now this position is very, very strong for white. Clear advantage for white. Yeah, so I will like this for black. And the right move after C5, I think very hard to find in a normal game, is knight on D7. It's the only move to defend the position, because when queen B3, now black can try to do bishop takes F3, queen takes F3, and now knight C6. And in this way, black can defend this position, but white is fine, because you can play bishop C4 to attack F7. Now E6 seems forced to defend, and now bishop E3, then castle kingside, knight C3, and maybe you can also play something like A3, B4, B5, or also play for rook D1, D5. So yeah, you have a good plan for on in the middle game. So I think this position is very good for white. Okay, we can go back. So what they said, okay, knight F3. Now, for example, knight takes D5, H3. Okay, another option for black can be take immediately the knight. And in this case, I can take with the queen. And probably, okay, black can have more options, or E6, and then bishop E7, for example. In this case, I can also play C4. No, C4 not immediately, because if C4 immediately, there is knight B4. And there is this problem. And for example, it's not so good defend, because in this case, it's possible queen takes D4, and I lose material, because if queen takes, knight C2, and black is much better now. Yeah, so C4 immediately is wrong for this reason. It seems interesting, but doesn't work, because there is this move. So not immediately, maybe A3, before to do that, A3 and then C4. Because after C4, white can make a good pressure against b7, so this is much better. Yeah. Okay, so after e6 this, if g6, an easy way to develop the pieces for white can be bishop e2, bishop g7. Now, for example, we can make pressure with also castle, and if black takes the pawn, there is rook d1, and white now is winning a piece because if c5, c3, and white is a piece up. So yeah, we can also wait to defend d4, so I can play castle. If, for example, black moves castle, now I can simply play a rook d1. Then my deal would be c4 and make pressure in this way. So, for example, if knight c6, I think I can play or a3, for example. Oh no, I made a mistake. No, now after knight c6, there is the pawn to defend the pawn d4. So to defend it, we have two options, or we can play bishop e3, but I think it's not so good allow this trade. Probably it's much better play c3 now, because the white advantage is placed on the center, so this is good. And after that, go forward with the development. And in the future, we can afford attention about remove the knight on d5. So for example, after e6, we can develop the piece with knight e3, if maybe queen d7, then go knight c4, and we can have a good play because we can block e5, we can develop the bishop on g5 then, and yeah, white has more space, and the white is better for this reason. And this, for example, can be a good option for white, I think, so yeah. When we move the bishop to e2, the main idea is, okay, so we go back, so bishop e2, g6. Okay, so in this case, bishop takes f3, queen takes, and okay, if e6, in general, we must remember that the bishop can go east to e2, east to c4. The idea is that when we bring the bishop to e2, probably in the future we can replace the bishop to f3 and to make pressure on the queen side. And but in other position we can play also bishop c4, for example, because this bishop can also make pressure against f7. For example, if black moves something like knight c6 immediately, in this case can be also possible another option, bishop b5. The idea is also weaken the pawn structure. So in general, we can have also three options. If knight c6 can be possible that. Another interesting variation that, for example, Bolgan showed in his videos for chess base is c6 in this case for black. And after c6, for example, can be simply fine for white play bishop e2. The idea about c6 is develop the dark bishop in fianchetto, and after that is better play c6 because if black moves e6, f6 square is weak, d6 square is weak, so there is this problem. And after that, we can simply play with the white castle. And after bishop g7, we can simply play rook d1. And in this case, c4 can be easy because after castle c4, knight b4 doesn't work because if knight b4 now there is queen b3, and I can go to take the pawn b7. If a5 without problem, a4 and a3, sorry, and if a4, I can simply take the knight, so it doesn't work. Yeah, so now knight b4 is completely bad, and black has to play knight here. Now the pawn is under attack, and in this particular case, is also clever for white. Is bishop e3 to defend the pawn, but also queen e4, because the idea about queen e4 is defend the pawn with the queen, allow also bishop f3, knight c3, and also make pressure against the pawn e7, so also bishop g5 can be playable. So that's very interesting. So we must distinguish this variation in which black played a fianchetto, and the variation that I showed before when there is this, and now for example, we can imagine also e6, because if c4 immediately, knight b4 now is strong because the bishop can defend the knight, so there is this very important difference between the two variations. And now, for example, a3 can be fine. Can be also fine, for example, play bishop c4, also bishop e2, but a3 I think is easy. a3, if bishop e7, now c4, and white can take a good position, so this is fine. Okay, well, so we further attention about this variation with knight f6 and after d4, bishop g4. So this is a very important line. My tip is playing knight f3. In the next video, we further attention about knight exd5 immediately. That I think is the main variation for black. So we further attention about that. And we will see all the problems and all the weapons that white can use against this variation. Okay, thank you at all to see this video. I remember that if you have questions, feel free to write the comment below. And see you for the next video. Bye. Remember to follow me on social networks and share the video with your friends. Thanks!